Wyatt Miller walked to his car in the empty parking lot. It was past midnight, and a consulting firm where he worked was silent. As a former military tactician, he was used to late nights studying defense plans. The stars shone brightly above him as he reached for his car door. A strange light flashed across the sky. Wyatt looked up, his body tense from years of training. The light grew bigger and brighter. Within seconds, it was directly above him. He tried to run, but a beam of green light shot down and froze him in place. Wyatt felt his body rise off the ground. His mind raced as the parking lot grew smaller beneath him. Then everything went black. He woke up with a pounding headache. The floor beneath him was cold and hard. Wyatt sat up slowly and looked around. He was in a small cell with dark gray walls. A faint blue light came from strips along the ceiling. There was a simple bed, a sink, and nothing else. "You're finally awake," a woman's voice said. Wyatt turned to see a woman watching him from the cell across from his. A clear wall separated them. "I'm Allison Reeves," she said. "They brought you in about 6 hours ago." "They?" Wyatt asked, his mouth dry. "The Vrex," Allison said. She pointed down the hallway. Wyatt moved to the clear wall of his cell and looked where she pointed. What he saw made his blood run cold. A tall creature walked past. It looked like a giant insect walking on 2 legs. Its body was covered in a black shell that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its head had large compound eyes that glowed a dull red. "What are they?" Wyatt whispered. "Aliens, obviously," a man's voice said from another cell. "I'm Sam Martinez, former Marine. Been here 3 weeks now." Wyatt looked around and realized there were at least 20 cells in this section, most filled with humans. Men and women of different ages and backgrounds, all looking tired and afraid. "Where are we?" Wyatt asked. "They call this ship the Obsidian," Allison said. "At least that's what we think based on the sounds they make when referring to it. It's massive. We've only seen a small part of it." "Why are we here?" Wyatt asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. Sam's face darkened. "They're running tests on us. Taking people away. Some come back. Some don't." A loud buzzing sound filled the hallway. The humans in the cells fell silent immediately. 2 Vrex appeared, dragging a young man between them. The man's body was limp, but his eyes were open, staring at nothing. "That's Rick," Allison whispered. "They took him yesterday." The Vrex opened a cell and placed Rick inside. As they turned to leave, one of them stopped and looked directly at Wyatt. Its head tilted slightly, as if curious. Then they both walked away. "They're interested in you," Sam said. "New arrivals always get special attention." Wyatt moved back from the wall and sat on his bed. His mind was already working, analyzing everything he'd seen. The layout of the cells, the timing of the guards, the technology level of the doors. "Has anyone tried to escape?" Wyatt asked quietly. 3 people, Allison said. "All failed. The ship is a maze, and the Vrex are stronger than they look." Wyatt nodded slowly. "I'm Wyatt Miller. I used to plan military operations for the Army. If we're going to get out of here, we need to understand this place. The routines, the weaknesses." Sam laughed without humor. "Good luck with that. These bugs have thought of everything." "No one thinks of everything," Wyatt said. He looked around at the other prisoners, his eyes taking in details others might miss. "Every system has flaws. Every enemy has weaknesses. We just need to find them." A loud alarm suddenly blared. All the humans covered their ears. "Shift change," Allison explained when the noise stopped. "They do this every 8 hours." Wyatt smiled slightly. "See, already we know something useful. Routines can be predicted. Predictions can be used." For the first time since waking up, Wyatt felt a sense of purpose. He was in a nightmare, but nightmares could be fought. He just needed a plan. 3 days passed on the dark ship. Wyatt spent every waking moment watching the Vrex. He counted their steps, timed their rounds, and studied their behaviors. The aliens moved with mechanical precision. 6 guards changed shifts every 8 hours. Food came twice a day. The lights dimmed for 8 hours to simulate night. Wyatt scratched marks on the floor under his bed, creating a crude map of what he could see. The cell block had 30 units arranged in a circle. Beyond that was a large open area where the Vrex gathered. Further still were doors that led deeper into the ship. "You're going to get yourself killed," Sam mourned from across the hall as Wyatt continued his observations. "Knowledge is survival," Wyatt replied simply. He had learned this in military training. Know your enemy before you fight them. On the 4th day, a new prisoner arrived in the cell next to Wyatt's. She was a woman with short brown hair and steady hands. The Vrex pushed her into the cell roughly. "I'm Wyatt," he said when the guards left. "Kate Donovan," she replied. "I'm a doctor. Or I was, before they took me from my hospital." Wyatt nodded. A doctor could be useful. Later that day, one of the prisoners collapsed. An older man named Frank fell to the floor of his cell, holding his chest. The Vrex noticed quickly. 3 of them entered the cell block, carrying strange devices. They opened Frank's cell and examined him. Wyatt watched closely. The Vrex seemed concerned about keeping the humans alive. They used tools to scan Frank's body. One of them made clicking sounds to the others. They carried Frank away. "They won't hurt him," Kate said, noticing Wyatt's expression. "They need healthy test subjects. I've seen aliens like this before." Wyatt turned to her in surprise. "You've seen the Vrex before?" Kate shook her head. "Not Vrex specifically. I worked at a research hospital that studied the previous alien contacts. The ones from 5 years ago. Different species, but similar approach. They see us as specimens, not people." This was valuable information. Wyatt moved closer to the clear wall between their cells. "Tell me everything you know about their biology. Weaknesses, strengths, anything." Kate hesitated. "Why? What good will it do?" "Because I'm going to get us out of here," Wyatt said quietly. Over the next few days, Kate shared what she knew. The insect-like Vrex had tough outer shells, but softer areas at their joints. Their eyes were sensitive to bright light. They breathed oxygen but could hold their breath for several minutes. Meanwhile, Wyatt continued mapping the ship. When the Vrex took him for his first examination, he counted doors and intersections. The medical room was 23 doors from the cell block. The Vrex lab had equipment that looked similar to human medical tools but more advanced. Wyatt also started talking to other prisoners. Allison was an engineer who understood mechanical systems. Sam knew weapons and combat. A quiet man named Doug Peterson revealed he worked with computers before his capture. "We need to communicate better," Wyatt told them during the dim period they called night, without the Vrex knowing. Doug suggested a simple tap code. 1 tap for yes, 2 for no, and patterns for danger or opportunity. The prisoners practiced while pretending to sleep or eat. On the 10th day, Frank returned to his cell. His skin was pale, and he had strange marks on his arms. But he was alive. The Vrex placed him gently in his cell. "They tested some kind of drug on me," Frank whispered when the aliens left. "They watched how my body reacted. Took samples." That night, Wyatt gathered his closest allies using the tap code. Kate, Allison, Sam, and Doug listened carefully. "The Vrex are smart, but they're predictable," Wyatt explained. "They follow patterns. We don't have to. That's our advantage." "What are you suggesting?" Allison asked. Wyatt looked at each of them. "We start planning, not just to survive, but to fight back. The Vrex think we're just test subjects. They don't expect resistance." Sam nodded slowly. "A strategy?" "Yes," Wyatt said, "and it might have to be brutal." 2 weeks passed on the Obsidian. Wyatt's plan grew more detailed with each day. The prisoners now used their tap code regularly, passing messages from cell to cell. They learned which Vreks were scientists and which were guards. They named them based on small differences in their shells or movements. One morning, a young prisoner named Billy Garcia was taken from his cell. Billy was only 19, captured while camping with friends. He looked terrified as the Vreks led him away. "They're taking more people now," Kate whispered to Wyatt. "3 yesterday, now Billy today." Wyatt nodded grimly. "They're speeding up their tests. We need to act soon." He tapped a message to Sam. "Today we test them." Sam tapped back. "Ready." When the Vreks returned 2 hours later, they didn't bring Billy back. Instead, they moved toward another cell, where a woman named Rosa waited. Wyatt gave the signal. 5 quick taps on the floor. Immediately, Sam began shouting and banging on his cell wall. Allison did the same. Then Doug and Kate joined in. Soon, half the cell block was in chaos. Prisoners yelled, screamed, and threw themselves against the clear walls. The Vreks froze. Their antennae twitched rapidly. Wyatt watched carefully, noting their reactions. 2 guards rushed away while 3 stayed behind, making sharp clicking sounds at the prisoners. "Keep going," Wyatt said to Kate. The noise grew louder. One prisoner, a former musician named Jack, created a rhythm with his banging that others followed. The synchronized sound seemed to disturb the Vreks even more. Finally, 6 more guards arrived. They carried long rods that glowed blue at the tips. One of them pressed a button on the wall. A high-pitched sound filled the room, and every prisoner covered their ears in pain. When the sound stopped, the cell block was quiet again. The Vreks moved through the area, looking into each cell. They stopped at Sam's cell longer than the others. One Vreks made a note on a device it carried. "They're identifying troublemakers," Wyatt whispered to Kate, "just as I expected." Later, when the lights dimmed for night, Wyatt gathered information from everyone. The Vreks had taken Rosa despite the disturbance. Billy never returned to his cell. The aliens had increased guards in the cell block from 6 to 8. "Did we learn anything useful?" Doug asked through the tap code. "Yes," Wyatt replied. "The Vreks are rattled by unexpected behavior. They don't adapt quickly to chaos. And most importantly, they're now watching Sam more than the rest of us." "How is that good?" Allison asked. "Because they're not watching me," Wyatt explained. "We needed to know if they could identify leadership. They assumed Sam was in charge because he was loudest." The next day, Billy was brought back. His body was thin and weak. Strange blue marks covered his arms and neck. Kate examined him from her cell. "They're testing some kind of toxin," she said quietly. "His body is fighting it, but barely." Billy could hardly speak, but he managed to tell them what happened. The Vreks had injected him with different substances, watching how each affected him. They took samples of his blood after each test. "They said something about human resilience," Billy whispered. "They seemed surprised I survived." That night, Wyatt called a meeting with his inner circle. Using the tap code, they communicated across cells. "The Vreks are studying how to poison humans," Wyatt said. "They're creating biological weapons to use against Earth." "How can you be sure?" Kate asked. "Billy's symptoms match weapons research I've seen before," Wyatt replied. "We're not just test subjects. We're templates for genocide." A heavy silence fell across the cells. Even through the tap code, Wyatt could feel their fear. "My strategy might get some of us killed," Wyatt finally said. "But if we do nothing, everyone on Earth dies." One by one, they tapped back their answer. One tap, yes, they would follow Wyatt's plan, no matter how brutal. Wyatt began the next phase of his plan. They needed weapons, tools, and more knowledge of the ship. Every prisoner had a job now. Some washed guard patterns. Others collected small items that might be useful. When Kate was taken for an examination, she memorized the medical tools. When she returned, she drew them for Wyatt using dust on the floor. "This one could be a weapon," she said, pointing to a long, thin tool. It delivers drugs, but it could also inject air. That would cause death. Wyatt nodded. Next time, try to take one. 3 days later, Kate returned from another examination with a small metal tool hidden in her shoe. The Vrex never checked the prisoners after examinations. Doug was taken next. He was the tech expert. Wyatt told him to look for communication systems. When Doug returned, he had valuable information. "They have a central communication room," Doug whispered. "I saw it when they were moving me. It has a large screen that showed stars and other ships." "Could you operate it?" Wyatt asked. Doug thought for a moment. "Maybe. Their technology is advanced but logical. If I had time to study it." Allison, the engineer, was most valuable for understanding the ship itself. After her examination, she reported that the ship had different sections connected by long hallways. "The power systems run through the floors," she said. "I saw panels they opened to fix something. The ship is huge, bigger than we thought." Sam focused on learning about the Vrex weapons. The guards carried 2 types, the stunning rods and small devices that fired darts. "The darts knock you out instantly," Sam told Wyatt. "But the guards are careful with the dart guns. They might have limited ammunition." While his team gathered information, Wyatt worked on the hardest task, creating a map of the entire ship. Each time a prisoner returned from an examination, Wyatt asked for details about their route. Slowly, a picture formed in his mind. The ship had 5 main sections: the cell block, the medical area, the command center, the engine room, and what appeared to be living quarters for the Vrex. The communication room Doug saw was near the command center, far from the cells. "We need to get to that communication room," Wyatt told his inner circle. "If we can send a message to Earth, they might be able to find us." "But how?" Allison asked. "We're locked in cells." Wyatt looked at Billy, who was still weak from his tests. Then at Frank, who had also been used for experiments. Both men had suffered, but both had returned. "There's one way," Wyatt said quietly. "We need to get taken for examination. All of us, at the same time." Kate shook her head. "The Vrex never take more than 3 prisoners at once." "Then we make them," Wyatt said. "We create an emergency they can't ignore." Later that night, Wyatt shared his idea with the group. It was dangerous. Some might die. But it might be their only chance. A new prisoner arrived the next day. His name was Paul Nelson, a school teacher with kind eyes and a gentle voice. When the Vrex left, Wyatt welcomed him and quickly brought him into their plans. Paul was horrified. "You're talking about sacrificing people," he said. "There must be another way." "I've considered every option," Wyatt replied. "The Vrex are careful and methodical. They don't make mistakes, so we have to force them into a situation they haven't planned for." "I won't help kill other prisoners," Paul insisted. "This isn't about us anymore," Wyatt said. He pointed toward the ceiling. "Everyone on Earth is in danger. The Vrex are making weapons to use against humans. We're the only ones who can warn our people." Paul fell silent, the weight of this knowledge visible on his face. That night, Wyatt continued collecting items for their escape. Kate now had 3 medical tools. Sam had fashioned a sharp weapon from his metal food tray. Doug had memorized the guard change times perfectly. Wyatt looked at his growing team. Soon, they would be ready to put his brutal strategy into action. A week passed. Paul watched Wyatt with worried eyes. He had joined their planning sessions, but still disagreed with the brutal parts of the plan. "There has to be a way without risking lives," Paul said during their night meeting. Wyatt shook his head. "I've thought of everything. The Vrex are too careful, too organized." Their argument was interrupted when the main doors opened. 6 Vrex entered, moving differently than usual. Their steps were faster, their antennae twitching with excitement. One of them went to the control panel and pressed several buttons. A voice filled the room, speaking in broken English. "Humans, your tests will increase tomorrow. New phase begins." The room went silent as the Vrex left. The prisoners looked at each other with fear in their eyes. "What does that mean?" someone asked. Kate's face was pale. "Based on what I've seen in their medical bay, they're moving to larger scale tests. Maybe all of us at once." "We're out of time," Wyatt said. He turned to Paul. "Do you understand now? Tomorrow could be too late." Paul looked around at the frightened faces of the other prisoners. Slowly, he nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Wyatt gathered his inner circle. "We start tonight. Everyone know their parts." They nodded. The plan was complex but clear. First, they needed to create a ship-wide emergency. This would force the Vrex to follow emergency protocols, which might open doors normally kept locked. "Kate, the medical tools?" Wyatt asked. Kate showed him the 3 tools she had stolen. One was sharp like a scalpel. Another was the injection device she had mentioned earlier. The third was a small scanner. "The scanner shows body heat," she explained. "It might help us track the Vrex." Next, Wyatt turned to Doug. "You're sure about the communication panel?" Doug nodded. "I can figure it out. I just need time." "Lissa will get you that time," Wyatt said, looking at the former police officer who had been quiet until now. Lissa Wright was strong and skilled in hand-to-hand combat. She would protect Doug. Sam and Allison would lead another team to find an escape pod or smaller ship. Wyatt had seen hints of a docking bay during his examinations. "And me?" Paul asked. "You stay with the main group," Wyatt said. "Keep them calm and organized. If something happens to me, get them to the escape point." Paul looked surprised at this responsibility, but nodded firmly. The hardest part came next. Wyatt explained how they would create the emergency. "We need a fire in the waste system," he said. "It's the only area with materials that will burn hot enough to trigger alarms." "How do we start it?" Sam asked. Wyatt held up a small device he had made from parts of the examination table. "This will create a spark, but someone has to take it to the waste room during an examination." "I'll do it," said a quiet voice. Everyone turned to look at Billy Garcia. The young man was still weak from his tests, his skin marked with blue lines. "Billy, no," Kate said. "You're not strong enough." "That's why it has to be me," Billy replied. "The Vrex already think I'm too weak to be dangerous. They won't watch me as closely." Wyatt looked at Billy for a long moment. This was the brutal part of his strategy, using Billy's condition to their advantage. "It's dangerous," Wyatt warned. "If they catch you." "I know," Billy said, "but if I do nothing, I die anyway." "We all do." The room fell silent. This was the reality of their situation. Sacrifice was necessary for survival. "Tomorrow, when they come for the next round of tests, we'll put everything in motion," Wyatt said. "Get some rest. Stay alert. And remember, no matter what happens, get to the communication room. Earth needs to know what's coming." As the lights dimmed for the night cycle, Wyatt lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His brutal strategy would begin in just a few hours. Some would live. Some would die. But Earth might be saved. He closed his eyes, hoping he had made the right choice. Morning came too quickly. The blue lights brightened as the night cycle ended. Wyatt watched as the Vrex entered the cell block right on schedule. They moved with purpose, heading straight for Billy's cell. "It's time," Wyatt whispered to Kate. Kate nodded and began coughing loudly. Then Allison joined in. Soon, several prisoners were coughing and holding their stomachs. The Vrex stopped, their antennae twitching rapidly. "Sick," Kate called out to them. "We're all getting sick." The Vrex gathered, clicking to each other. More guards arrived. Then a different Vrex appeared, wearing markings that showed it was a medical officer. It carried scanning equipment and moved from cell to cell, checking the sick prisoners. When it reached Kate's cell, she fell to the floor, shaking. The medical Vrex made urgent clicking sounds. 3 more medical officers rushed in. "Perfect," Wyatt whispered. Just as he had predicted, the Vrex were concerned about their test subjects dying before experiments were complete. The cell doors opened. Medical Vrex entered to examine the sick prisoners. As planned, the prisoners offered no resistance, appearing weak and frightened. Billy was taken out along with 5 others. Wyatt caught Billy's eye and gave a slight nod. Billy had the fire-starting device hidden in his clothing. 30 minutes passed. Wyatt grew tense. Had Billy succeeded? Was the plan falling apart already? Then a loud alarm blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in the corridors. The Vrex reacted immediately, moving with less order than usual. Some ran toward the source of the alarm. Others stayed with the prisoners, clicking frantically to each other. "Now," Wyatt said to Kate as a guard passed their cells. Kate screamed and fell against her cell door, which was still unlocked from the medical examination. She tumbled out, surprising the guard. Sam burst from his cell at the same moment, tackling the Vrex. 2 more prisoners joined the fight. In the confusion, Wyatt slipped out of his cell. He ran to the control panel and pressed the buttons he had seen the guards use. More cell doors opened. Prisoners poured out, following the plan they had practiced in their minds for days. "Lisa, take your team," Wyatt shouted. Lisa nodded and gathered 6 prisoners. They headed toward the corridor that led to the escape pods, armed with makeshift weapons. "Doug with me," Wyatt said, grabbing the tech expert. Allison joined them, along with 2 other prisoners. They moved quickly through the now open doorway and into the main corridor. The ship was in chaos. The alarm continued to blare. Smoke filled parts of the corridor, suggesting Billy had succeeded in starting a fire. Vrex ran in different directions, some carrying equipment, others with weapons drawn. Wyatt led his small team through the smoke, following the path he had memorized from countless prisoner reports. Left at the first junction, right at the second, then straight for 15 doors. There, Doug pointed to a door marked with strange symbols. "That's the communication center." 2 Vrex guards stood at the door, their weapons ready. They spotted Wyatt's group and raised their dart guns. "Down," Wyatt shouted. The humans dropped to the floor as darts flew over their heads. Sam, who had joined them after securing the cell block, threw his makeshift spear. It struck one guard in the joint between its shell segments. The Vrex clicked in pain and fell. The second guard fired again. This time, a dart hit one of the prisoners in the neck. He dropped instantly, unconscious or dead. Wyatt grabbed a metal pipe they had brought and rushed forward while the guard was reloading. He swung the pipe with all his strength, striking the Vrex where Kate had told him their equivalent of a neck would be. The guard collapsed. "Help me drag them away from the door," Wyatt ordered. They pulled the fallen Vrex aside, then turned to the communication room door. It was locked with some kind of electronic system. "Doug?" Wyatt asked. Doug examined the lock. "I can bypass it, but I need time." "Hurry," Wyatt said, looking back down the corridor where shouts and clicks echoed. "More will come soon." As Doug worked on the door, Wyatt checked on their fallen comrade. The man was still breathing, just unconscious. One small mercy in their brutal plan. The door slid open with a hiss. Beyond it lay their best hope for saving Earth. The communication room was filled with strange technology. Screens covered the walls, showing stars, planets, and what looked like maps. Control panels with blinking lights lined the room's center. "Doug, get to work," Wyatt ordered. "Find a way to send a message to Earth." Doug rushed to the main control panel. His hands moved over the alien technology. His eyes narrowed in concentration. "Allison, help Doug." "Sam, watch the door with me," Wyatt said. They dragged the unconscious prisoner inside and closed the door. Sam found a way to lock it from the inside, but it wouldn't hold for long. "How's it coming?" Wyatt asked Doug after a few minutes. "This technology is amazing," Doug said. "But I think I understand the basics. It's like our communication systems, just more advanced." A loud bang came from the door. The Vrex were trying to get in. "Hurry," Wyatt urged. Doug worked faster, pressing buttons and studying the screens. Allison pointed to symbols that matched ones she had seen in the engine room. "There," she said. "That looks like a transmission control." Doug nodded and pressed a series of buttons. A new screen appeared, showing what might be frequencies or channels. "I think I can send a basic signal with our location," Doug said. "But I need to find Earth first." Another bang on the door. Metal dented inward. "They're breaking through," Sam warned, gripping his makeshift weapon. Wyatt looked around for anything they could use to barricade the door. He pushed a heavy piece of equipment against it, but it wouldn't hold for long. "Got it," Doug suddenly shouted. "I found our solar system. I'm sending the message now." The screen flashed with strange symbols. Doug pressed more buttons, and a small green light began blinking. "Is it working?" Wyatt asked. "I think so," Doug said. "I set it to repeat our coordinates and a simple distress call. If anyone on Earth is listening, they'll know we're here and what's happening." The door burst open. 3 Vrex guards pushed through, weapons ready. Sam attacked the first one, driving his sharpened metal bar into its eye. The Vrex screamed, a high, terrible sound. "Get down," Wyatt shouted as darts flew into the room. One hit Sam in the shoulder. He stumbled but stayed on his feet, fighting through the pain. Another dart struck Allison in the leg. She fell, her body going limp. Wyatt grabbed a piece of equipment and threw it at the guards. It hit one in the head, making it stumble. Doug continued working at the console, trying to strengthen the signal. "There's a maintenance tunnel," Doug shouted, pointing to a small opening near the floor. "I saw it on the system map." "Get Allison out that way," Wyatt ordered. "I'll hold them off." "You have to come too," Doug protested. Wyatt shook his head. "Someone needs to keep them busy so they don't cut the transmission. Get to the escape pods. Find Lisa and the others." Sam pulled a dart from his shoulder, his movements slowing. "I'll stay with you." "No," Wyatt said firmly. "Get the unconscious man and go with Doug." "That's an order." Sam hesitated, then nodded. He and Doug dragged Allison and the other unconscious prisoner toward the maintenance tunnel. It was small but big enough for humans to crawl through. More Vrex poured into the room. Wyatt grabbed Sam's fallen weapon and stood his ground. He struck the first guard that came close, aiming for the weak spots Kate had identified. Doug looked back one last time before entering the tunnel. "The message is sending. Earth will know." Wyatt nodded. "Go." As Doug disappeared into the tunnel, Wyatt faced the incoming Vrex alone. A dart hit him in the chest. Pain spread through his body, but he fought against the drug. Another dart struck his arm. His vision blurred. The last thing Wyatt saw before falling was the green light on the console, still blinking. The message was still being sent. Earth would be warned. His brutal strategy had worked, even if he wouldn't live to see it. Darkness took him as the Vrex surrounded his fallen body. 3 weeks passed. Deep in space, Earth's newly built warships moved silently toward the coordinates received in the distress signal. 5 ships, the best humanity had to offer, approached the massive black vessel. Captain Ben Foster stood on the bridge of the lead ship, the Defender. His face was grim as he studied the scans of the alien vessel. "It's huge," his first officer said beside him. Ben nodded. "Any life signs?" "Mixed readings. Several hundred Vrex signatures, and about 20 human signals scattered throughout the ship. 20 survivors. When they had received the distress call 3 weeks ago, it had mentioned over 30 humans held captive." Ben's jaw tightened. They had come as quickly as possible, but for some, it hadn't been fast enough. "Prepare the boarding teams," Ben ordered. "Priority is rescuing our people." The Defender moved closer to the Obsidian, accompanied by the other warships. They had followed the small tracking devices left by the escape pods they had found drifting in space days earlier. The pods had contained 8 humans, led by a woman named Lisa Wright. They had told Ben about the man who had made their escape possible, Wyatt Miller. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "We're receiving a signal from inside the alien vessel. It's in English." Ben turned, surprised. "Put it through." A woman's voice came through the speakers, weak but determined. "This is Kate Donovan aboard the Vrex ship. If you can hear this, approach with caution. The Vrex are in disarray. Internal systems have been damaged. We've been fighting from inside." Ben looked at his officers in amazement. They've been waging a guerrilla war from inside the alien ship. The teams boarded the Obsidian through multiple entry points. They moved through dark corridors, encountering occasional resistance from Vrex guards. But something was wrong. The aliens seemed disorganized, confused. Many areas of the ship showed damage from internal fighting. Ben led one team toward the strongest human life sign. They fought their way through 3 Vrex guards, then entered what appeared to be the ship's command center. The scene inside made Ben stop in his tracks. 3 humans stood with makeshift weapons, surrounded by dead Vrex. And at the main control panel sat a man. His body was thin, his skin marked with blue lines. His hands moved over the alien controls with confidence. The man turned as Ben's team entered. His eyes were tired but alert. "Wyatt Miller." Ben asked in disbelief. Wyatt nodded slowly. "You got our message. We thought you might be dead," Ben said, moving forward to help him. "The others said you stayed behind." "I nearly was," Wyatt said. His voice was rough from lack of use. "The Vrex tried to experiment on me after capturing me. But their drugs had an unexpected effect." Kate Donovan stepped forward. "The toxins they tested on humans gave Wyatt a unique reaction. He became resistant to their control methods. When they thought he was sedated, he wasn't." Paul Nelson, the teacher who had once opposed Wyatt's plan, added, "He escaped and freed those of us still in cells. Then we started fighting back, using everything he taught us." Ben looked around the command center in amazement. "You took over their ship?" "Not exactly," Wyatt said. "We just made it impossible for them to function normally. We destroyed food supplies, damaged systems, attacked in small groups, then disappeared." "Wyatt's brutal strategy worked," Kate said with respect in her voice. "He taught us to think like guerrilla fighters. No direct confrontations, just constant disruption." Ben helped Wyatt to his feet. "Earth's military would like to learn from you, Mr. Miller." Wyatt shook his head. "I just did what was necessary to survive and warn Earth. Nothing special." As they led the survivors to the rescue ships, word spread among the Earth forces about what these ordinary humans had accomplished. How they had fought against impossible odds. How one man's strategy, brutal but effective, had saved not just the prisoners but potentially all of humanity. The Obsidian, once a place of terror, was now a testament to human resilience. And Wyatt Miller, who had never considered himself a hero, had become one through necessity, intelligence, and the will to survive.